Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am your host, Robert Santana, along with my co-host, Trent Jones.
Yo, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. This is early for me, but, felt like changing it up today. They say it's good for the brain, right?
Would you wake up like an hour ago? 30 minutes ago?
What is it, 12 here? Cause
You look well coiffed today. See, I can see him on video because we do these, we talk over Zoom. But yeah, so I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to say you've been up for an hour.
Well, no. I woke up at about, I want to say 8 a.m. It's 12 p.m. here, so 4 hours.
All right.
And I thought we were doing it at 1 your time, or my time. Thought we were doing it at 1 my time, but it turns out I agreed to 1 your time. And, I didn't feel like getting started just yet. I kind of drag my feet in the morning sometimes, so I start coaching anywhere between 11 and 1, depending on the day. But, yeah, man, I'm like a midday kind of starter. When I worked in clinical, it was the same thing. I'd start my dialysis work at like between 10 and noon.
Yeah. We had to, so this is good. So before you do all your coaching work today, we're going to get you nice and riled up here on the podcast.
Yep.
That's we're going to get you all heated up.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, something that definitely gets me heated up, something I, have learned to understand the use for, but I think it's real shitty in certain situations. We're going to talk about RPE.
RPE.
Or let's broaden that. We're going to talk about perceived effort and using perceived effort to drive training, because there's, every day somebody comes up with a new acronym to sell their scale that pretty much tells you the same shit. It's garbage in, garbage out. But,
right.
You have RPE, rating of perceived exertion. You have RIR, reps in reserve. And there's probably others that I'm not aware of. But what they all have in common is that they are a measure of your perception of effort. So highly subjective.
I like the, I don't know, I need to come up with a name for this, but I like sometimes I'll get clients, and especially newer clients online, and they'll tell me, they'll write these like comments, because I have a little comment box, where they put in where they have their exercises listed for the day.
Yep.
And there's a little comment box. They can tell me, if I prescribe an AMRAP set, how many reps did they get? If anything went wrong, they tell me, right? But then sometimes people comment like easy, medium hard. That was pretty hard, really hard, and I'm always like, okay, great. It's supposed to be hard. That means you're doing it right. If it's hard, that's kind of what we're doing here is, we're pushing the limit a little bit every day, but they don't realize, I think, that information means very little to me, especially when they are novices, right? When they are pretty new to training. If something is really hard, then I don't really care what their subjective impression of that set was. Now, on the other hand, and we're going to talk about this more here on this episode. On the other hand, if I have one of my clients that's been training with me for 3 or 4 years, and they tell me like, wow, man, that set was really fucking hard. And first of all, that's not a normal piece of information that they give me. So if they say that meant it was well beyond their expectation, and I listen to that. Because, if they tell me it's hard, I know it was really hard, and it gives me an indication of, maybe I need to make some shifts in the programming. But I just always think that's funny. There's like the easy, medium, hard, kind of hard, but I could do it. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's the point. I wouldn't put it on the paper if I didn't think you could do it.
I mean, ultimately, we all got to learn to go for the fucking rep,
Yeah, right.
And that's been lost in the last 8 years, I'd say, maybe 10. And, let's just give a little historical background to this. RPE stands for rating of perceived exertion, as I said earlier. And RPE was used in the, cardiorespiratory / aerobic / endurance world when measuring, or estimating, I should say, VO2 max from a graded exercise test. They would, put a mask on the runner or the cyclist, depending on which test you were running. You can do it on a bike. You can do it on a treadmill. Typically, there's other modes too, but those are the two most common in academic research. And that mask measures the amount of air you're expiring, the air that's coming out of your mouth. And based on the composition of the gases in that air and the composition of the gases in room air, which are known quantities, so they have these constants for those. You can estimate how much oxygen is coming in. But for those of you who don't know, that test does not measure the amount of oxygen that is coming in. It is estimating it from the carbon dioxide oxygen that is coming out, right?
Okay.
And what we have in the room air. Nothing going in is being measured directly. So just FYI, if you want to measure that directly, you got to run catheters, up into the venous and arterial system. Nobody's trying to run catheters up to your heart while you're running. I mean, it's been done, believe it or not, but
oh God,
I'm not.
That sounds awful.
I'm not signing up for that. Yeah,
No.
up the femoral vein into the aorta, and then up into the venous system as well. I can't remember where.
You're gonna make me pass out like on the show. I'm just gonna start if I go white and I hit the floor.
Can you imagine running with holes poked in you? I mean,
no,
fuck, man, and then going to failure. You think they're actually going to failure when they got holes poked in them?
I have a hard time, even getting blood drawn.
Oh shit!
Good God!
Yeah, no, they're threading this from your inner thigh up into your heart. On both sides. I forgot which vein they go up. Probably, I don't want to misquote, but
we could cut this one off for me.
Anyways, when they're measuring all this, they're also asking the participant, the research participant, how hard it feels, and they have a scale of 6 to, I think it was originally 6 to 20, actually.
Okay,
and it's on a big cardboard cutout. And they usually have a graphical image of, some cartoon and, grimacing or whatever as it gets harder. And then it'll say easy, extremely easy, and then, kind of hard. There's different words they use for it, and they put it like into those ranges, So it's not like every single number has one of these characterizations. It's like every 5 numbers you'll see like hard, extremely hard, about to fail, And
right.
I think they just record this to get an idea of how hard the effort was when they failed, to the person. I think it's, still bullshit, but it's an aerobic activity. It's pretty clear that somebody fails when they fall off a treadmill. So,
right.
Nobody, I think that we're going to try our hardest to not do that, even if, if we don't have, mental toughness. Fear will keep you from trying to fall off the treadmill. So if somebody falls off the treadmill, they probably went to failure, whereas somebody will bail on a squat, that's not a big deal. You set it on the pins and you get out of there. But you fall off the treadmill, you think you're going to jack your jaw. And as much as you want to trust the people behind you to catch you, you don't trust that as much as safety bars on a squat,
Right.
So I think if you fall off the treadmill, you fail. So I think RPE is probably, on a graded exercise test, it's probably pretty accurate if you're making the person go to true failure. But in the weight room, especially, when you're a novice lifter, first time I thought a weight felt hard when I ran the linear progression. I mean, I can't think years before that, but I remember I got to 275 for 3 sets of 5, and I was like, fuck, that was hard. And there was a quarter on it, so there's that psychological thing too. There's 2 plates and a quarter. But then, you have to add. And, I acknowledge that I'm not wired like many people, especially people that hire me. I'm not wired like the type of person who hires a coach. I've hired a coach before. So it's not an offensive statement I'm trying to make. It's just that, I do this for a living. It's another way of me saying I do this for a living. I'm wired a certain way. When it comes to this, I want to go for it. Whereas, thinking of the average guy that I work with, I don't want to throw out my back. I got to go to work,
Yeah,
or,
right.
As do I, by the way. But again, I go at this a little bit more competitively than the average person.
Sure.
So, I'm like, well, I got to add. And then 280, I'm like, this has got to be it. I got 280, 3 sets of 5. I'm like, this has got to be it. Then 290, same thing. And then, I started getting into the 300s. And, I got it all the way up to 330. But it was at a point, or 335 the last run, it was at a point where I wanted to get it, but then I didn't want to get it. Part of me wanted to miss so that it was over,
Right, yes, yeah.
And if I was assigning an RPE to this, I would have never went past 275, which is kind of funny because when I was younger, I didn't like loading more than 275 on the bar, I would just kind of stay away from that number,
So let's talk about, before we go deeper into that, because I agree. I come from the same kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about RPE as applied to lifting. So that's interesting. I didn't realize that it was an aerobic measurement first, but it makes sense, that came from that background.
Yeah.
So I guess at some point, powerlifters started applying the same concept to rating perceived effort in the big power lifts. And I first heard of this concept through Mike Tucherer.
Yep, same here.
Powerlifter. He runs reactive training systems. Obviously, really smart guy, super strong lifter. Mm-hmm. I think he just competed again for the first time in a long time.
Kidding me? I didn't know that.
I think and he pulled some pretty big numbers too. But anyway, so this is where I first heard of it myself. I don't know if he was the first one to bring it over to powerlifting. Probably not. It probably has been done formally or informally by people, earlier than that. But he has a chart on his website. This is the first place that I've seen it on reactive training systems that shows it's like a flow chart, mm-hmm. right? So RPE, the way that he conceptualizes it, is a rating from 1 to 10, but really the first 5 numbers it's just like so easy that it's not relevant to the weight room, right? Like by the time we're in the weight room, we're at a 5 or a 6. And we're talking about like 5 or 6 is like warm-up weights, right? Okay, right. So the flow chart really starts at 5 or 6, wherever you want to put it on in the middle of that range. But what we really care about is more like the 10 and then counting back a few numbers from there. So 10 is absolute maximal effort. It means that, I could put a gun to your head and be like, or even better, I could put a gun to your kid's head and be like, I'm going to shoot him if you don't get this rep, and you couldn't do it, right? There's absolutely no motivation in the world that could get you to do another rep. Your eyeballs are bugging out of your head. Your veins are, you're blowing capillaries, and then you can walk it back from there. So an RPE 9 is, well, did you have one more rep in the tank? Like for sure another rep in the tank? Okay. That was really hard, but you had a little bit extra. Could you have done 2 more reps? RPE 8. Right, and you can back it down there. 3 more reps, okay, or you could also think of it as like, was that a nice, snappy, easy rep? Okay, that was an RPE 7, right? And then from there, people have sort of added nuance to that grading scale and given half ratings. So you're like, well, I think I could do another rep, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay, fine, that was a 9.5, right? Or like I definitely had 1 more rep, but I don't know about that second rep. Okay, that was an RPE 8.5. So that's where I first heard about it, is this sort of flow chart. And the first thing I think about when I hear about this rating system where it's like 10 is the maximum, and you got to like, so basically like you got to go down from there, and then it's like you think about how many reps you might be able to do past what you did, and that's how you get your score. It made me think of Dungeons and Dragons. Did you ever play Dungeons and Dragons?
Similar stuff, not that though.
Okay, so old school Dungeons and Dragons had this concept. It like a lot of weird concepts, really. They had this concept called THACO. It was an acronym, right? To hit armor class 0. That was the acronym. Mm-hmm. So in old school Dungeons and Dragons, this is like the 2nd edition. If your character was going to be accurate with his weapon, right, and you wanted him to like hit the enemy like when he attacked and not just whiff all the time, you wanted to have a low THACO, right, your THACO score. So it was like basically if you roll a 20-sided die, your THAC-O score, your THAC-0 score is what roll do you have to make to hit an enemy with an armor class of 0. So if your THAC-O is 15, you have to roll a 15 or better on the dice to hit an enemy who has an armor class of 0. Okay, what if their armor class is lower than 0, like -5? Okay, well, you got to roll a 15 plus 5. You got to roll a 20. Do you see how crazy this gets? Like, it's already super confusing, right?
Yeah, and you're like, and then a long time ago.
Yeah, right. And then like armor class goes from like the lower it is, the better. So it goes from 20 is like basically you have no armor on to like 0 is pretty good, but then you can go into the negatives. It makes no fucking sense whatsoever. Thankfully, they've changed that in the game, but that's what RPE kind of like makes me think of, is like, I got to work backwards in my head. I'm already trying to rate something subjectively, and then like the number thing just does not work for me.
Well, so here's the thing. I think that, I try to work backwards, and, like I think Tucherer really believes in what he's, saying, so I try to like look at it from his point of view. And see how he arrived at this conclusion. And Mike Teixeira, is an elite power lifter. I don't know his exact numbers, but what, in the eights, squat and deadlift?
Oh, he's definitely deadlifting in the eights.
Yeah, is he squatting that too?
Probably. I think he's a little bit older guy now. He's been powerlifting for a long time. Yeah, so he's probably a master's lifter now.
He was in his top peak probably in like 08, 06 to like 2012, right? Is that probably a good window?
And that's probably fair to say. Yeah.
And probably before that. He said he did it in high school, and that, I remember Rip asking him, do people come to you because you were playing football and ask you to power lift? And he's like, no, I was powerlifting and the football coaches wanted me to play football. So that's a good interview on Starting Strength website. I think it was 2012 they recorded that. But
yeah, it's an old one, but good one.
I try to think about his perspective. So if you are, and he was a 275, I believe. I don't think he was over 300. Mm-hmm. But and he's tall, so he's like a jack 275. And you got to figure this guy is, squatting and deadlifting triple body weight, possibly for more than a rep, And even if he's not, like, the absolute raw load is quite heavy. Let's forget that he's 275 for a second, because, if you stripped everybody down to skeleton, I don't think that, skeletons weigh that much more from each other,
Yeah.
I think a lot of our body weight comes from other tissues and whatnot, but our bones are probably, the margin of difference is probably not that huge. So
yeah.
you think about 5, 6, 7, 800 pounds on the spine, right? For a squat, or that much, pulling down on it on a deadlift, right? That's a lot of load, and it's systemically stressful. And I'm nowhere near that strong, but I'm probably good in the mid 500s right now for a deadlift. I'm getting closer and closer to 500 for the squat. And I can tell you right now that when I squat heavy, so like heavy for me, what I did 370 for 8 last week, mm-hmm. I'm probably not going to hit that again until next week or possibly the week after. The deadlift's probably a better example. My squat, I think I'm at the tail end of bi-weekly PRs. I probably need to go every 3 or 4. And by that, right. I mean, then you also got to consider, I got to look back at how many PRs in a row I get doing that, So it's not like I'm on a linear progression here. But mm-hmm. deadlift, for instance, right? Getting from 430 to 440 has been a pain. My PR is 435 for a set of 8. Finally hit 440. 2 weeks later, I hit 445. So that's 2 PRs in a row. 2 weeks later, I put 450 on. I get 3 reps.
Yeah, right.
So
you're still carrying fatigue from that last 445 pull.
Yeah, and let's not forget the 375 for 8 squat that I did the week earlier that week, So now the stress is accumulated. Now you magnify that, right? You got a lot more weight on the person. Possibly drug use. I don't know if Teixeira's on or not. There's people that I've talked to that believe he's not, and that's none of my business. But irregardless, drug use or not, that's 8, 7, 6, 7, 800 pounds that, these people can do for several reps, right? That's incredibly stressful. So like you just saw, my trajectory becomes less predictable as I'm lifting more raw weight. I don't even want to say as I'm getting stronger. Obviously, I'm getting stronger, but as you're lifting more raw weight, because somebody lifting in the 200s, 300s, you're not going to see this, You're not going to experience
it's not a...
You start to see this irrespective of body weight, because I see it in big and small guys alike. Once you're squatting 400, 500, 600 pounds,
Yes.
I have a guy who, he pulled 640. He was probably good for 675, but he was doing a bunch of other stuff too. But he pulled 640. He pulled 585 for 5, and he was very explosive, and he was about 210. And as soon as he would squat over 500, the injuries would accumulate, like hip mm-hmm. would start hurting, knees would start hurting, shit would just start happening. So he had to spend a lot of time doing 400 or less, in the context of what he was doing. He was doing other stuff too, but even before, when he was just lifting, same kind of problem. He could not handle that kind of tonnage very often. Right. So you have to spread it out. There's various ways to approach that. So Teixeira believed that, well, since it's unpredictable, let's add this subjective metric in there so we can adjust and allow our bodies to quote unquote auto-regulate, as they call it. So let's say that he squats 700 for 5, right? And then the week after, 500 feels like bricks, So he might end up doing, I'm throwing numbers out there. I haven't looked at his training log, but sure. But I've heard 700-pound deadlifters tell me that 500 feels stapled sometimes. So that's where these numbers are coming from. So, now he's going to maybe do 450 for a set of 8, or something like that, and he'll get enough stress from it because it's still 450, I mean, the raw weight cannot be ignored. So that's kind of, I could see how he arrived at that approach. My training is highly unpredictable because I'm reaching ceiling effects and the raw weight is very heavy. So I need to find a way to approach this logically,
Yeah, right. And it also, like you said earlier, it accounts for the fact that, if you're a competitive lifter, you're not just doing one lift. I think you could say the same thing for strongman, right? The guys that are lifting incredibly heavy weights. You're never just training for one event. So the mix of other stuff you're doing besides the lift that you're trying to progress is going to affect your fatigue levels, right? And that's going to change, right? Your program's going to cycle through, what you're doing on your deadlift is going to change. It's not always going to be exactly the same relative to when you're going after heavy squat attempts, and that will affect your heavy squat attempts. So you have to have some way of regulating the dosage of stress that you are trying to impart in the program at any given time.
I always say that once you're no longer a novice, that's when the herd gets thinned because people get weeded out pretty fast in that second year or so, probably year 2 or year 3 at the very latest, because training becomes less predictable.
Right.
And you become more sensitive to your lifestyle, just to kind of put it all under one umbrella, right? Your lifestyle, some genetic limitations. I got a young man that I've been training for years who just has shitty connective tissue. So, he's good for a 400 plus deadlift, a 300 plus squat. But the situation I just described, actually, it's funny, this is a good time to talk about this. It kind of applies to him, right? Like I have to accumulate a lot of work under 300 pounds on the squat, under 400 pounds on the deadlift. And I have to spread out those real heavy pulls, even though the raw load's not heavy and he's a big muscular guy. Like he's tall. I think he's he's like 190. I think he's very top heavy. So he's 190. I want to say he's taller than me. He's like probably 5'11", 6 foot maybe. But he's very top heavy. He's muscular. Like if you saw him, you'd think he's muscular. But for whatever reason, connective tissue problems,
Right.
So, So I have to adjust for that, and I have to spread out the high intensity stuff and make sure things are light, and if I'm having them do, because I have them do some isolation stuff to kind of move those, get some blood flow to those tendons, but even that has to be carefully planned, right?
Right. But, not everybody gets the same hand. That surprises some people. I primarily work with guys over 40, and all those same things are true. They just get exacerbated by the fact that they're older,
Yeah.
So some guys get a raw hand with their back, with their spines, with their elbows, with their shoulders, their knees. And you have to address that. For a novice, it's really about like learning how to eat through those problems a lot of times, learning how to sleep better, learning how to move better, move with better technique to manage those things. But eventually you nail down all of those factors. And then it's like, well, I'm sorry, man, we're just going to have to like waive your training and you're just not going to be able to push things as hard as often.
No, and you see it with older lifters as well. That happens very quickly in the first few months. I've had guys go to one squat a week after 2-3 months, just because that's where the recovery is. But, do we want to give the lifter the responsibility of self-selecting a load? And I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no because especially novices and early intermediates, the experience isn't there to know what's actually hard and what's not,
Right.
And,
let's talk about that really quick. Quick, though. Okay, so like a novice. So, one of the things we say in starting strength, in the starting strength methodology is we don't like percentage-based programs for a novice because in order to do a percentage-based program, you got to have a baseline that you're calculating your percentages off of, right? And you think back to high school football. What do they have you do at the beginning of the off season? We're maxing out. We're all going to hit 1 RMs, right? But like you get a bunch of people like they don't even know how to squat to begin with. How the hell are they going to produce a 1 rep max? Whatever they do end up doing is not indicative of what they're truly capable of, right? They don't
No,
have the
hell no.
skill to do it. And then, like you said, the subjective experience is not there. Like you said, like for me, it was the same thing. 260, I remember, was like a really big deal when I first squatted that for 3 sets of 5. I remember when 315 went. I remember the first time I squatted 405. And that was like a whole different experience than it was 385 or whatever I'd done, previously for a single. And it just keeps going up, right? Like, frankly, it was really different when I squatted 435 compared to 405. And but the thing is, like, until you have been pushed to at that RPE 9.5, 10 level, I'm not so sure that the average person can even get there by themselves. I think that's probably something that someone has to push you to do, whether that's a competition and there's the stress of your peers, or it's just a really competitive environment with a lot of other very serious lifters who are more experienced than you pushing you along, or somebody yelling at you.
Yeah, you have to have somebody pushing you to really hit that. I mean, I had a string of misses on my deadlift, and I missed loads that I've hit before, and I couldn't understand it. And I'm more advanced, and one of my members is like, "Your grip doesn't look secure." So I'm like, "Well, this shit ass chalk, I got to replace it." And what I was noticing too was my low back was starting to round, which is not something that I do. And
Right.
I'm like, well, this is all lining up with a grip problem, but I just wasn't feeling that during the lift, So I ordered a new chalk, used it the next week, and then resumed going up. And that's how I've gotten these recent PRs. So it's kind of funny, but,
Yeah.
you're not going to push yourself that hard, and that can apply to any level. So, yeah.
Right. And to wrap up my point there, I think that's the thing is, like, until you have been pushed to experience that, I don't think you're going to get there on your own. Maybe some people can, right? There are clearly some people who have just a hyper competitive. Ronnie Coleman probably could do an RPE 10 by himself without any prodding from anyone. Okay, but he's a special human being. The average person is probably not going to do there. So I think right off the bat, RPE for me requires that having been there, been pushed to that level, so that you know what it feels like. And then maybe you can subjectively rate that afterwards. But
100%. So I would completely agree with that. And I want to also highlight that when we're talking about RPE use in the weight room, and we're, basically shitting on it right now, we're talking about it in the context of training, right? In the context of exercise, totally fine. Some people like to exercise with barbells. I've worked with a lot of them. And to remind those of you who may have forgotten, or people new to the show, exercise means you're just going in the gym to get a good workout. You're not chasing any numbers. There's no objective to get stronger. And you may use a barbell to exercise.
Right.
You may squat, press, deadlift, and bench press with no intention of making that heavy. And in that case, you are better off going in there and squatting whatever the fuck you feel like squatting than not squatting at all. So if an RPE gives you some sense of, okay, how hard should it be today? Fine, use it, And I've used it for plenty of exercise clients, people exercising with barbells. But if you are training, which I was back in the day when I was prescribed an RPE, it's an easy way to fuck yourself up in terms of just wasted time in the gym. And, some of my colleagues use it and disagree with me. That's fine. We don't agree on everything. If you're listening, that's fine. Keep using it. I'm not going to tell you how to run your business. But this is my opinion on the matter based on someone who was told to use it, and I'm also someone who's highly competitive, and just a bunch of time wasted. I wore out my back squatting. I couldn't deadlift anything, couldn't get anything moving off the floor. It got my bench up because that was undertrained, so I was just repping out set after set after set on the bench. So, I think the volume that I ended up doing taught me that, okay, I need a little more stress on the bench press. But, basically what ends up happening with a lot of people with RPE, and I saw this with myself, this was like 10 years ago, is that you sandbag the lifts you don't like and you start putting too much weight on the lifts you like,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's something about, even for someone who's fairly advanced, there's something about having a progression on paper where it's like, even if you're like yourself and you're adding weight to your squat once every 3 weeks, okay, but the fact that you have that extra 2.5 or 5 pounds or 10 pounds, whatever your rate of progression is, on the paper, that's like its own little taskmaster because it's staring at you in the face. And if you decide to change anything, if you're like, well, I did 370 last time, I don't know about today. Maybe I'll just do 350. It's kind of like already mentally you've started to fail if you back down from 375,
exactly.
right? Because 375, when it's on the paper, you're like, well, if I don't do that, then I am admitting right off the bat that I failed.
Opportunities.
It's just a mentality. It's a mental thing for sure. Which I think so that can be a very useful tool for a lot of people is just having the simple reality of progression staring you at the face, in your training log
too.
And you have to, it kind of makes you
you're accountable to that number, whether it's there or not,
Absolutely.
I've had guys that have been doing this for several years before they gave me the steering wheel in their programming, and then they made tremendous progress simply because I was telling them to lift something that they would have otherwise walked away from.
Exactly. By the way, I have something that I've started telling people recently because I realize some people don't do this. It never occurred to me, but I encourage everyone to keep a paper training log, even if they're, an online client of mine. I keep a paper training log. But I realized I was talking to somebody who I don't coach, but they were talking about like how they annotate their workouts. And they're like, I do the workout and then I write the sets and reps down. And I was like, whoa, red flag right there. If you do that, you're going to be able to talk yourself out of whatever you had mentally planned on doing. I was like, no, write down what you're going to do for your workout on the page first before you even start warming up, right? Okay, last time I did 310. I got to do 315 today. Write it down. 315 for what? I'm going to do 3 sets of 5. Okay, bam, write it on the paper because then if you don't do it, or if you, let's say you do 2 sets and you're like, oh my God, I don't want to do a 3rd set. Okay, well, if you make that choice, then you have to go back to your log and you have to scratch that out and say like, I only got 2 sets. And you have to write that down. And for me, I've caught myself doing this where the thought of having to write down that I didn't do what I had written down that I said I was going to do, the thought of that made me go and do that extra set that I really didn't want to do. Or it made me do that extra rep that I didn't want to do. It sounds stupid, but I've seen that happen with people, and I think that's it's a great way to motivate yourself.
Yeah. I'm really bad about my training log. I end up filling it out after the fact, but I see what I did. At some point you have the mental, for you, I think at this point, the mental thought of like not adding is probably going to be enough of a motivator. But if you hadn't developed that habit yet, showing up
is
showing up's the most important thing, and I say that all the time. But so what do I do instead when I'm working with someone?
Okay. Yeah. Tell me.
Well, if it's a novice, they're going to add weight to the bar every other workout on most of the lifts, every workout on the squat if they're squatting 3 times a week. And as they progress, that'll go to every 4 days, every 7 days, early intermediates, typically every 7 days, then, every 14 days and every 21 days. And then at some point in all this, it becomes less predictable and the PRs spread out and things start to interfere and, training becomes less predictable. So I went in last Friday. So the week before I hit 335 for 2 sets of 5 on the straight-legged deadlifts, which meant that I hit a deadlift last week. I got in there and I was like, fuck, I have to deadlift heavy today. So that never prevents me from making the lift. That prevents a lot of people from making the lift. So try not to think that way. But, for me, when it's time to go, it's time to go. I might whine a little bit about it, but I'll get it done. Anyways, I load 450 on there, get 3, and then it just stops. I'm like, well, fuck, I know what that means. That means I'm not recovered,
Yeah, right.
Because when it flies up for several reps in a row and then just stops, you probably didn't sleep enough, didn't eat enough, got drunk, did something else that took energy from you. Something got in the way. I think in my case, it was the squat I did 3 days ago, or 3 days before that. Yeah. I hit a PR set of 8. That, I may repeat with a side view for all these, colleagues of mine that reminded me that it might have been high. Well, might have been, might have not. The oblique angle is not good for judging depth, but I think one of them may have been high. So next time you're getting 2 angles. And if it's not deep, I ain't fucking posting it. So I better get down there. Anyhow, I was still carrying fatigue from that. So I'm like, well, shit, what do I do now? Oh, I'm going to do an RPE 7. No, I'm not going to fucking do that. I'm just like, all right, well, last week I did what? 335 for my working sets on the volume. I just wasted a bunch of gas here doing this 450 for 3 reps plus a failed rep. So I'm just going to do 315. It's 20 pounds less than what I did the week before. We convert that into a percentage. So what is that? 315 out of 350?
That's what, 90%, right?
Yeah, that's 90%. So, I took off, 450, sorry. 315 out of 450. Yeah. 450 is what I just hit. So we can't math here today.
70%. 70%.
Yeah, so I took 30% off, and hit that. And what you'll find too is that as you get stronger, the percentage of your max, assuming you've actually maxed, this doesn't count if you're a CrossFitter and just decided, I'm going to max out today, bruh. No, if you've maxed out, you've carefully planned it, you've ran your triples, you've ran your singles, done your practice, did a realization phase, you're an intermediate advanced lifter that competes, whether it's in the gym or at a meet. If you have legit maxes like I do, the higher those get, the lower the percentages that you could use for productive work.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So in my case, looks like, a little over 70% is what I do for volume on pulls. Mm-hmm. So I went down below that because I'd just done a heavy triple, Right. So I'm like, I want to do a few percentage points below what my working volume weight would be on the opposing week just to get some work in. And that's what I did. And then this week I'll probably do 337.5 since I had a failed rep last week. I want to add a little bit to the volume week. So I'll just add 2.5 pounds rather than 5 since I'm going to have to repeat the same intensity weight the week after or maybe the third week. And do that for 2 sets of 5. And that's going to be that, right? So that's one way to do it, But how do I know this? Oh, well, data, I've collected data over the years. You start to see where these offloads are. When my RDLs were at like the 365 to 375 range, I couldn't go heavy the following week. And then I tried ramping it up and doing like every 3 weeks and the same thing. So it was too much intensity on my volume weeks. So I know that it has to be in that 70 to 75% range to be productive. Now, your max is improving as you're getting stronger. So these percentages actually get smaller if you're doing things right because your next max is going to be heavier,
Yes, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a good example of how you can do it. And that's a way that I think when I think about programming for people, I often think in those terms. I'll give you another example. Mm-hmm. I had this happen just yesterday. So I was supposed to deadlift heavy, and I was going to pull 410 for a set of 5.
Okay.
So I was going to try to go for a PR set of 5 for me. 405 is my PR. So add 5 pounds. My lower back has been killing me for the last couple of days. Now, I'm very fortunate. I do not have back pain. I don't even have a little bit of back pain day to day. That's not normal for me. But I've developed some lumbar pain, probably because I've just been sitting a lot. I've been working lots and lots of hours, have not been sleeping very well for the last week, and I have a lot of time sitting in my butt in the studio chair doing work. So that's probably what caused it. My lower back felt very compressed, and this was like, this was like a few notches above baseline for me.
Right.
So not a good situation. And for me, my lower back, especially when I'm pulling more than 3 reps, my lower back is usually the thing that starts to give out on the deadlift. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, well, it was significant enough. I'm like, I don't think pulling from the floor is a good idea today, but I want to pull heavy. I don't want to back down from that. So instead of deloading my deadlift, I decided to rack pull. I'm like, okay, I'm going to just shorten the range of motion and kind of cut out that range of motion off the floor where I could potentially round my back and exacerbate whatever I have going on. So based on previous data, I could probably pull a rack pull of 445 for a set of 5. So what do? I was like, well, 445 again. That would be a pretty maximal pull for me for a rack pull. So I walked it back from there. I decided to do 425. Okay, so I pulled 425. Had a little grip issue thing because I use a really shitty bar for rack pulls, so I can bend it up, and it has like absolutely no knurl on it. So the bar slipped out of my hands after rep 3. I had to re-grip it, but I did 5 reps, and it was decently hard. It was pretty dang hard, but I had another rep, probably 2 in the tank. Okay, so what I ended up doing there is an RPE 8. Right? Is that right? RPE 8 or 8.5 or what? See, I can't even remember the numbers.
Yeah, if you in fact had 2, but
okay,
could have
so
been
yeah,
3 or 4.
yeah. So it was an RPE 8 set, right? And that's so that leads me to the way that I use RPE. And so first of all, I don't use RPE, right? I have tried it a couple times in the past, and I end up using other terminology, but it's the same concept. When I have somebody that's dealing with a rehab situation, or in an acute tweak situation like what I just described, I find it useful to give some sort of target like that. But I tend to do it in the way that I described. Like, okay, let's pick, based on recent training data, let's pick a number that would constitute a heavy set for you today. But let's walk it back 5%. Mm-hmm. Maybe let's walk it back 10%, right? And we end up arriving at the same point, I think. Just for me, that gives me a little bit more concrete number in my head because I'm dealing with hard numbers. Okay, 445 would constitute not a PR, but like an increase from what I had rack pulled previously. Okay, that gives me a hard concrete number. Based on how I'm feeling today, that's probably not a great idea. So let me walk it back 5% from there. I can calculate that number and put it down on the paper, 425. Okay, let's load it up and go. As opposed to with RPE, had I said, okay, let me do an RPE 8 set of 5 on a rack pull. What is that? What is that number?
Right.
Then I have to start thinking about, okay, 445, what could I hit? Could I hit 445 for 5? Yeah, I don't think I'd have anything in the tank there, so I've got to go down from there. But see, it's just a little bit more abstracted off the bat rather than dealing with concrete numbers. And so that's my main beef with RPE. I actually like the concept and I do use it in specific scenarios, but I don't like the way that actual scale of 7, 8, 9, 10 works. I think it's just too abstract for my brain.
Well, same here. I'm stealing that, by the way. Next time I miss, I'm going to go for a rack pull. But I think in a rehab situation, I could see the reason why someone would want to use it, but then I find that what an RPE 7 is, let's say, for a rehab situation, maybe a 7 for your muscles, but not your connective tissues. So I find that guys are lifting light weights and then getting more pain because it needs to be insanely light for that connective tissue situation to improve. So
right.
I just, I have to tell them empty bar, or I'll do a calculation. Let's, do 30% of max, if I have that data,
right.
Or like, I try to think what's stupid light for this person, and I just go there, right?
Yes.
Because I found that a set they can do for 20, a weight they can do for 20 is still too much on whatever joint is pissed off, or connective tissue.
Yes.
So
I actually same scenario. I had a guy who he popped his hamstring a few weeks ago. It was a minor tear, but it was definitely a tear. We had bruising and swelling in the area, so we basically I put him through the STAR rehab protocol.
Right.
Worked great. 3 weeks later, he's feeling great, but I'm not gonna just ram him right back up to where he was on the squat.
No.
The guy's, he's over 50. His connective tissue, I want to give it plenty of time to heal up. So what I did instead is after he got through the phase where he absolutely needed to lift very light weights, I would give him a range.
Right.
I'd be like, hey, listen, I want you to go, I want you to load up 95 to 135 pounds today. Mm-hmm. And I let him pick, and that way, if he goes to the max, there's still a governor on it, right? But if he's really feeling tentative, because I don't know how he's feeling that day and how, if he's feeling nervous or fearful about it, then he can go 95.
Right.
I don't care. We're going to get the progression in there either way.
Yeah. And again, you're dealing with hard numbers, and I think
hard numbers.
That's really what this comes down to. The one area where I like to use RPE with a trainee is when I have someone who is a train wreck from a technical standpoint, and this only happens online. If you're in the gym, I fix this typically that day. If it comes back, we fix it when it comes back. But with an online coaching client who has not had in-person technical instruction, but is workable, okay, I could get you here, but it's going to take a couple weeks. If somebody's a complete disaster, I'll say you need an in-person coach,
Right.
But with, we got to remind the audience that there are problems that are unique to the online sphere, the cyber sphere, and some that are unique to in-person. And when you're dealing with an online client, any program you put somebody on assumes that the lifts are being performed as intended.
Right.
You and I request videos. We want to see what these people look like. We analyze movement. If I have somebody who's just, rep to rep, there's variability. Day to day, there's variability. I'll put an RPE in there, or I won't assign a load at all, or I'll assign the same load every time. I find that RPE works better than assigning the same load every time because psychologically seeing that pisses off the client. I've noticed people don't like to see that their numbers aren't moving, So I think it's a useful tool psychologically to keep the person engaged because it's like, okay, I'm doing an RPE 6, or 7. But, we're working on form, right? Whereas if it says 45, 45, 45, 45, 45, it's like, oh, I'm not going anywhere. It's like there's a psychological component to all this shit, unfortunately.
It makes it, that's interesting. It makes it their choice to add or not, right? Yeah. With an RPE. It could be 45, could be 50.
Yeah.
There's not a huge amount of difference, in like a squat or deadlift in that. Maybe that's a big difference in press for someone, but it makes it their choice rather than you putting down 45 every time.
Yeah. And I haven't had a problem with people putting too much weight on. Guy who's going to do that's already strong. That's a whole different issue. But, a novice who hasn't lifted a lot before, they're not going to put 225 on the bar,
Right. Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Typically they'll put a weight on that they're managing because they're also afraid of getting hurt at that stage in their training a lot of the time, especially the type of people we get.
Right.
Which is reasonable. Again, you have other things to do. These aren't, we don't work with a highly competitive audience, from the standpoint that they want to get on a platform and they're going to sacrifice their bodies. They have other things to do.
Right.
But I like to use RPE when I'm trying to iron out technique issues to A, not discourage the client and show them the same number every time. B, from a safety standpoint. But the most important thing there is that once they're moving consistently, we're adding load. That RPE goes out the window,
Yeah.
Another place that I use, if somebody's, look, man, I'm remodeling my house. I only got half my gym. I'm not sleeping, da-da-da-da-da-da. Basically, training's taking a back seat. All right, we're going to put an RPE in there so you don't fuck yourself up because somebody in that situation is also probably not going to load up a bunch of weight and say, oh, I just put 500 on. That's an RPE 7 and their max is 505. They're not going to do that,
Right.
I mean, that can happen. There's outliers, but generally it doesn't happen. Like, okay, I've just taken on a bunch of responsibility. My training's taking a backseat. I'm going from 4 days a week to 2 days a week. I only have time for 2 lifts, but I want to make sure I show up. Now the focus has shifted. I can't predict load in that situation. And this person has now went from training to exercise. He is trying to exercise to maintain as much as he can from his training while he gets through the life event that he's trying to get through. And that's a different situation. But the one area that we've consistently criticized RPE on is using it in the context of actual serious training where, you have the bandwidth to do it. You're trying to push heavier, trying to extend your limits, all of that. It just is not useful in my experience because it gives you an out. It gives you an out, and we don't want an out. We want an in because we want to get stronger. And as someone who has continuously gotten stronger for over a decade, I think I'm entitled to an opinion on this matter.
Right. Yeah. So I think a lot of it's psychology, the psychology of the lifter definitely comes into play. And a guy like Mike Toucher, I don't think he needs to worry about pushing himself in the gym, right? It's
we're not
different
talking
psychology.
about him. He also correlated RPEs with percentages, which means that, in his mind, He's not taking
Yes.
it too light. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done that. But
Exactly. And I think he also at some point, I hope I'm not confusing this with another lifter. I think he also correlated these numbers with bar speed that he had measured.
Yeah, he
via
had a Tendo
TENS
unit. Yeah.
A Tendo unit. Yeah. So, this was objective data he was relying on. It's really, so I'm not blaming, I'm not criticizing Mike Tucher's implementation of RPE. It's just how it's been used more popularly and broadly.
Wait.
Now, I'll say this is an interesting experience I've had. So I don't have a strong opinion on this at this point. I need to run this longer to develop that, but I'll just give you some observations. For the last year, roughly, I've been running a handful of clients through a conjugate program. So, it's kind of an adaptation of the West Side conjugate method. I've been running it very similarly to the way that Andy Baker describes how he runs a conjugate method. I've made a few little tweaks of my own, and it's pretty conservative. I don't do everything that Andy does, and I don't do everything that the West Side guys do. But the heart of the conjugate program is the lifter every week performs a max effort lift for the upper body and the lower body, right? And the way that I do it 99 times out of 100 is it's a max effort single for an upper body lift and a lower body lift every week. And I control the stress week to week by exercise selection, right? So they start the cycle with the competition lifts, low bar squat, bench press, deadlift. Okay, that's the first 2 weeks of max effort lifts. And then the following weeks will be lifts that are inherently less systemically stressful. So like a front squat, right? So of course they're going to be carrying, especially if they're strong, they're going to be carrying a lot of fatigue from those max effort lifts in the first couple weeks. But if they do a front squat and they do it for max effort, well, it's going to be a lot less stressful. It's something they can handle after having done a really heavy squat and a really heavy deadlift. And the thing about a max effort single is it's sort of like RPE in the sense that the lifter has to choose the load. And I found for I'd call them a middle intermediate lifter, right? Where they've gone through some early intermediate programs, they've done some periodization already. For a sort of middle intermediate lifter, it's great for developing the skill of learning how to approach singles. And we'll see how this works out. Actually, a few of these guys that have been doing the conjugate program are going to be doing their first strength lifting meet in about 6 weeks. And so, one of the benefits I'm hoping is that this conjugate program will, expose them to a bunch of singles. They'll have a lot of practice with doing heavy singles. So, mentally, they'll be dialed in. Their form will be dialed in for hitting for performing a heavy single. But I'm also hoping that it really gives us a lot of good data on how to approach their openers, second attempts, sort of like conservative second attempt, more aggressive second attempt, and then a reach attempt for attempt number 3. And so I can really see the benefit of that approach, which is basically an auto-regulation approach where you're going to hit a maximum effort, not a particular number. I'm starting to see the benefit and the usefulness of that for a more experienced lifter, because that is a skill of lifting. You have to, like for me, when I made that call on the rack pulls, that was based on experience of how much percentage I need to pull off the top to get the result that I'm looking for. Whereas I want to push myself pretty hard, but I need to back down from the utter limit, right? I knew that 5% was good because I'd done this a lot, and it only came through trial and error. So that's kind of one of the things that a conjugate method where you're doing these max effort singles that the lifter selects can do for you is it helps you develop that skill of knowing how you respond to different loads.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And again, comes back to experience, as we've been saying.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we hammered that pretty good there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. So, for me, right, I'm not gonna sit here and say that I hate RPE or that RPE is complete bullshit or anything like that. I really don't believe that. I think auto-regulation is a very important and useful thing for the more advanced lifter that you have to pay attention to. But RPE, as it is popularly used, with this number system, I don't use it, and I don't really see myself using it anytime in the near future.
Yeah, me either. Like I said, I use it for people that are exercising or whose training is less predictable, but none of these people that have unpredictable training because they're as strong as Mike Teixeira. That's not the
Right.
situation. It's unpredictable for other reasons.
Exactly.
When it's unpredictable for that reason, that's a whole different animal. You're
Right.
700-800 pound squat and deadlifter, 1,000 pound squat and deadlifter. Things become less predictable, and programming becomes even more of an art. But most of us aren't dealing with that, and probably never will deal with that. So unless you are giving training a back seat, you need to hold yourself accountable to a load of some sort.
Right.
And that's kind of my position on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I will say the other thing that's been kind of funny in the past when I've had to actually use RPE and I've tried to use it, what I've done is reps in reserve, because I found that so much easier to explain. Like, just tell me how many reps that you had left in the tank. And sometimes I still tell people, it's like, hey, listen, I want you to leave a rep in the tank or a couple reps in the tank, right? Sometimes I do that still. So technically that would be using RIR, or reps in reserve. But what I've found that's kind of interesting is when I've tried to use it in the past, my clients don't want it.
No.
They don't want to pick their own loads for the most part. There's a few that do, but the conjugate thing even is tough for people, because some people are like, well, just give me a number. And I'm like, well, no, you have to pick the number. It's part of the skill. You have to learn how to make these attempts. I'll give you some guidance, but you're going to have to be accountable for the attempts that you make. But the vast majority of my clients, they're just like, listen, just write something down on the page and I'll do it. Don't make me think. That's why I hired you. And so I think that's kind of funny. I don't think they would take well to RPE for that reason. So,
all right.
Now that we've pissed off a bunch of people, there you go. There's our thoughts on the RPE.
Yeah, I hope you learned something. All right, let's close out here.
All right.
Thank you for tuning into the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at weightsandplates.com or on Instagram at _Robert_Santana. If you are local to Phoenix, you can find the gym at weightsandplatesgym.com or on Instagram at weights_and_plates.
Yeah, if you live in the Phoenix area, you need to go see Santana, whether it's just for a form check or, if you just need to light a fire under your training. Hey, he's a fiery guy. He's good at yelling at you. He's going to get some results out of you.
That's what they say.
And push you. So you need to do that. Well, you know where to find me. If you're interested in training online, you can email me at jonesbarbellclub@gmail.com. All right, we'll see you again in a couple weeks.